I'm Darius Hardwick with Hardwick Tree Care, and today I want to show you a quick video on how to sharpen your saw. People often ask me how to sharpen saws, and I've been doing this a while and I've figured out there's some pretty easy ways to do it. The most important thing to know about your saw is when it's dull. I tell people, if your saw's not cutting like a dream, it's time to sharpen it. Oftentimes people let their saws go too long between sharpening until the saw will hardly cut wood at all. And at that point you have a dangerous saw. So be sure to sharpen your saw often. One of the ways you can check if your saw is sharp or not, pick up some of the stuff your saw is flinging out. If you're flinging out dust like sugar, you've got a dull saw. But if you pick up and you've got shavings, you can pick one up, fold it in half, break it, you got a sharp saw. The first thing you'll need is a few tools. There's a lot of tools on the market for sharpening saws, but really what you need is a round file. You need to make sure you have the right size file for your chain. Usually your local saw shop or an online chart can help you pick out and decide what size is the right size round file. It's nice to have a flat file for sharpening rakers. That's the little bump between the teeth on the saw. There's a couple of simple guides that I like to use that are actually helpful. There's a lot of guides that you can buy that really aren't helpful. This very simple guide, your round file slides in, you tighten it in, and you're done. Now it is important, one of the drawbacks of these guides is as you file, your file will get dull and you'll need to turn your file. You can make it just loose enough that the file will turn, or you can loosen them and retighten them as you're filing. There are lines on the back side that help you line up to the bar so you know your angle that you should be filing the tooth at. So now that we got that, we're going to file some teeth. You're not going to be able to see the teeth as well as you can with an open file, but I want to show you how this works. Ready to advance the chain, you use the file. You don't want to use your hand to move the chain. You want to keep your hands off of these sharp teeth so you don't slip. What this file does is this file guide does is keeps your file at the proper height. You should have about 20% of the file above the tooth. I'll insert a close-up of that so you'll see exactly how that is. It's possible to get your file too deep on the tooth or too shallow, and that'll mess up your cut. You should try to keep the length of the left and right teeth about the same, and you should try and keep the angle of the tooth the same. When your lengths of teeth get off from too much filing on your left or right, or your angles are off, you'll start to get a saw that cuts a curve through the wood, and that's typically from imbalanced teeth. As I go along, I'm twisting the file just a little bit so I keep a nice fresh edge on that file. This is a particularly dull tooth that's getting a number of passes. I recommend you get name brand files. You can get cheap files, but they get dull sooner. A good file is worth the money. when you lay the file into the tooth, 20% of the diameter should be above the tooth. I'll lay that on this side. You can see that file is above the tooth. There, that's important. This guide is your raker guide. After you've sharpened a saw, you can place this on the chain. You can feel if your rakers are high, and if they are, you can file them down. This usually has to be done only a couple times during the life of a chain, or every third or fourth time you sharpen a chain. So now I want to show you some of the parts of the chain. You have the teeth. And this one, you have lefts and rights alternating down the chain. This between the teeth is called the raker, which keeps the teeth from digging too deep into the wood. On the teeth, this is a fairly sharp tooth. On this tooth, you can see it's dirty on top. That's an indication that it's dull. On this tooth, you can see on the tip it's rounding a little bit. This tooth, you can see it's not a nice sharp tip on it. This chain isn't too bad, but I would sure sharpen it. Now before you sharpen your saw, you should tighten your chain. This chain is a little loose. To tighten a chain, you loosen the bar nuts just a little bit. You take your scrunch, the screwdriver end, put it in here, give it a little tight. You want it tight to where it pulls in to the bar, but you can just pull it out and it snaps back in. Now you also, before you tighten it, you want to be holding the bar in the up position. Tighten the nuts back down. I hold the scrunch close to the socket and give it a pretty good man squeeze. You don't want them crazy tight, but you want them tight. Now the chain, you can pull up, it snaps right back in. That might be just a little on the tight side, but as that chain heats up when it's running, it'll be the just right tension. Take the brake off the saw, use the end of your scrunch. The chain should move on the bar without any problems. So there you go. Now we're ready to start sharpening. Having a tight chain holds the teeth in place when you're sharpening it. One of the things that's important when you're sharpening a saw is that you're comfortable to do it. You can put the saw in a vise on a workbench, but I've learned to do it in the field because you always have the ground to do it on. So I usually sit on a saw to hold it, and oftentimes I'll try and put the bar up against some object. So as you're filing, the bar pushes against an object and won't want to wiggle out of the way on you. So I would recommend filing all your lefts or rights first, since your bar is pressed against an object. You can file, advance your chain, file your tooth, and advance your chain. Now, as you're filing, you should be able to hear the grind of the file and see the shavings from the tooth falling off as you file. It's important that you have a sharp file for sharpening your saw. A dull file is as bad as a dull saw. As you get going, if you haven't let your chain go too far, 2 to 3 passes with your file will adequately sharpen. Now it's important that you notice on the back of the tooth there's a little guideline that shows you the angle that the front of your tooth is supposed to be. When you get a dull saw, that angle can be off quite a bit one direction or another. But following that line on the back is a good indication. It's not critical that you be exact, but as close as you can get with your eye. As you sharpen, it's important to turn the file a little bit to let shavings that are built up fall out, or as your file gets dull, you want to use a sharp edge of it. When you're sharpening the saw, it's important that as you push your file forward, you cut, obviously, but then you lift your file out to back up. And then you push forward again, lift out, push forward. Pulling a file backwards will dull the file a lot quicker. You can hear the carve of the tooth. When your file stops making that nice carving sound, and when you don't feel the grind of the carve, you know you've got a dull file. Sometimes you can rub the file to clean it out, but you have to be able to know that your file's dull and it's time to replace it. So after we've filed the left side, it's time to move over to the right side. And when you're left or right-handed, it can be a lot harder to file the other teeth. It's a little more awkward just due to the left-right-handed nature. So you want to be careful that you're not going to slip as you file. Now, I'd like you to notice where I have my forearms. I've got my wrist on my leg. I've got my other wrist over against the saw on my leg. So I can't slip and hit my hands on the chain. That's very purposeful when I'm filing a chain, because believe it or not, some of our worst injuries in our business have been people slipping and raking a hand across the chain. Not big injuries, but they aren't fun. You'll often find that left or right teeth on a saw, one side will be dull while the other isn't. That's because if you hit something, it's oftentimes you'll hit something more aggressively with one of the sides of the saw. So this side is taking 4 to 5 passes to get them sharp. So there you go. I hope that's helpful in taking care of your saw and keeping it sharp. There's a couple things I'd like to throw in while I have your attention. Do wear chaps. They're important. They'll protect your legs from cuts. Most injuries from chainsaws happen to people's legs. In our business, we've had one guy hit his chaps. The chap saved his legs. And finally, one of our favorite sayings is, life slows down when you're holding a chainsaw. So be careful with that thing.